My grandpa always said that if you hand a nosy neighbor a clipboard, you're basically creating a monster. But none of us ever imagined that monster would literally leap over our backyard fence in the middle of the night, flashlight in hand, wearing what looked like night vision goggles, and start muttering about unauthorized flower beds. I was in the kitchen eating cold pizza when I saw it. Some figure was scaling our 6-foot fence like a parkour ninja, if that ninja had arthritis. They landed with a loud thud right in the middle of our petunia patch. Wasn't a thief. It was Linda Parsons, head of the HOA patrol squad, trespassing like she was trying out for a low-budget spy flick. Next morning, Grandpa rewired the whole fence himself. I remember him muttering, "If they want to play dirty, we'll give Linda a little zap of justice." Here's the thing about living on Cedarbrush Lane. Everything looks perfect. Grass is always freshly mowed. Shutters? Always that same colonial blue. And driveways? Pressure washed every single week. Skip one, and the HOA drops a warning on your porch like it's a ransom note. I used to think all this was normal, until Grandpa Hank moved in with us last year after Grandma passed away. That man was like dropping a Mentos into a bottle of Diet Coke. Within 2 weeks, he'd already racked up 3 HOA violations. One was for installing a windmill sculpture in the yard. Another was for painting his shed a bright, non-regulation red. But my personal favorite? For yelling "communist" at Linda during a board meeting, then storming out with a donut in each hand. So honestly, it wasn't a surprise when Grandpa finally snapped. I mean, nobody was really shocked, no pun intended. It all kicked off with the security footage. See, Grandpa had installed cameras after we got fined for leaving a garden hose out. Except, the hose wasn't even ours. It belonged to the Millers, and it still had their initials engraved on the nozzle. That night, the cameras caught everything. Linda, climbing our fence, sneaking around with a flashlight, even measuring our garden gnome with a ruler. At one point, she was digging through our recycling bin like she was hunting for classified documents in soda cans. When Grandpa watched the footage, something just snapped. He didn't say a word, just watched it 5 times in a row. Then he stood up and said, "War has rules. This ain't war." And he disappeared into the garage. What came out of there over the next 2 days? Honestly, it was part engineering brilliance, part retirement-fueled madness. Using copper wire, an old truck battery, a pile of extension cords, and way too much duct tape, he rigged the fence to deliver a mild electric shock. Nothing deadly, just enough to make someone rethink their life decisions. Mom told him he was out of his mind. Dad tried to talk him down. I recorded the whole thing for my YouTube channel. Grandpa called it Operation Sparky Perimeter. He even nailed up a wooden sign that read, "Trespassers will be shocked." Literally. First night, nothing. Second night, we heard it. This scream, high-pitched, undignified, and loud enough to set off 2 dogs down the block. We ran outside, and there was Linda, flat on her back next to the fence, twitching like she'd tried to kiss a toaster. She was okay, mostly. A little frazzled. Wig crooked. Smelled vaguely like burnt polyester. She immediately threatened to sue, shouted something about elder abuse, and waddled off while calling someone on speakerphone, loudly telling them she'd been attacked by a geriatric menace. By the next morning, the whole neighborhood knew. The HOA hit us with an official complaint, using words like reckless endangerment and intentional use of hazardous force. Grandpa ended up framing the HOA complaint and hanging it right above the fireplace like it was some kind of trophy. Mom lost her mind. Dad vanished into his office and acted like he'd ceased to exist. Meanwhile, my subscriber count skyrocketed. Linda, yeah, the infamous clipboard queen, started showing up at people's front doors, warning them about weaponized boomers. Didn't help her case that Grandpa was becoming a local legend. Mr. Kim from across the street dropped off a fruit basket. Ms. Gonzalez brought over a homemade pie. Pretty soon, neighbors were asking Grandpa for tips on defensive landscaping. One guy even offered to pay him to rig his mailbox to squirt water at nosy guests. Grandpa passed on the job, but kept the pie. The HOA? Definitely not amused. They hit us with another fine, $5,000, and this time, they threatened to take legal action. That's when Alex Martin, the lawyer who lived 3 houses down, knocked on our door. Alex had already racked up 3 HOA violations himself, something about an unapproved bonsai tree. "I've been waiting for someone to finally fight back," he said, stepping over a hose Linda had probably labeled contraband. "I'll take the case. Pro bono." And just like that, things escalated. It wasn't about the fence anymore. It became about the spying, the absurd rules, the sneaky little inspections. Linda turned into a symbol of everything broken on Cedarbush Lane. And Grandpa? He became the face of resistance, of pushing back, of saying no thanks to Stepford suburbia. But none of us were ready for what happened next. 2 nights after the Great Brenda zapping, someone cut the wires. Grandpa found the aftermath the next morning: snapped cords, scorched ivy, and muddy footprints leading away from the back gate. No one confessed. But Grandpa was convinced it was sabotage. And for the first time since all this began, he actually looked shaken. "This ain't just nosy anymore," he said, voice low. "This is coordinated. They're sending a message." And so, in the quiet calm of Cedarbush Lane, beneath pastel-painted homes and hummingbird feeders, the real war had begun. Linda started telling people she'd been electrocuted by a homemade death trap, customized specifically to take her out. She claimed she'd only been conducting a routine shrub inspection. You know, the kind that apparently requires a tactical flashlight and trespassing across someone's fence at midnight. By morning, her version of the story had grown wings. The HOA sent out an emergency bulletin accusing us of weaponizing residential infrastructure. And then came the news vans. They circled the neighborhood like hungry vultures. One anchor even called Grandpa the shock document. He absolutely beamed with pride. Not so amused. That? Still speaking only to his coffee mug. But Grandpa had already declared victory, until the cease and desist letter landed on our doorstep. Printed on thick cream-colored cardstock, the kind that practically whispers, "The end is near, but classy." The letter accused Grandpa of being a danger to the neighborhood. Apparently, he violated a bunch of obscure HOA rules, like Clause 14C, unregulated electrical barriers, and Clause 5G, hostile ornamentation. They demanded he dismantle the fence immediately, pay a $5,000 fine, and write a formal apology to Linda. Grandpa read the whole thing twice, snorted, and then used it to wipe grease off a wrench. Meanwhile, Linda was going full drama mode. She was seen limping around in a neck brace, even though the fence jolt was basically like a bee sting with an attitude. She called the cops, filed a lawsuit, and somehow landed a guest spot on a daytime show called Neighborhood Nightmares, where she compared Grandpa's fence to medieval warfare. "She's turned a quiet neighborhood into a war zone," Linda said dramatically, while the talk show host gasped like someone just spoiled the finale of their favorite soap. She even brought props. A scorched glove and a half-melted clipboard, like she was presenting evidence to the Supreme Court. Grandpa watched the whole segment while eating a bowl of cereal and just muttered, "Should have cranked up the voltage." That's when Alex Martin, our lawyer neighbor, showed up again, this time with a stack of paperwork and a grin that said he was up to something. "They want to play legal games?" he said. "Let's serve 'em a nice hot bowl of lawsuit stew." Alex laid it out for us. Trespassing is still illegal, even in Cedarbush Lane. And we had the security footage to prove that Linda had crossed onto our property, more than once, without permission. In one video, she actually poked Grandpa's grill with a ruler, then leaned in and sniffed the coals. "What's she hoping to find?" Alex asked. "Encrypted messages in the charcoal?" As word spread about Linda's midnight missions, something unexpected started happening. Neighbors began taking Grandpa's side. Mrs. Wilkins, 2 doors down, dropped off a tray of lemon bars and handed over a flash drive full of doorbell cam footage of Linda snooping through her flower pots. Mr. Kim said she once measured the exact space between his recycling bins. Even Pastor Daniels, who's usually the definition of mild-mannered, confessed that Linda had fined him once for aggressive ivy. At this point, it wasn't even about the fence anymore. It was about personal space, freedom, and lawn gnomes. Soon, Grandpa became a local folk hero. Neighborhood kids started calling him Shock Grandpa, and someone spray-painted, "Don't tread on Hank," across the community mailbox. People had just had enough. Enough of the HOA measuring their lawns with rulers. Enough of getting fined for Halloween decorations that violated holiday spirit uniformity. One neighbor, Carol, admitted she'd been hiding a purple wind chime in her garage for 6 years, like it was contraband. Everything came to a head when Grandpa and Alex filed a counterclaim. Their case was clear. Linda had trespassed repeatedly, had been caught on video, and was only lashing out because she was embarrassed. Alex labeled the evidence Lindagate. In court, we all sat quietly as the footage played. There she was, climbing our fence, tripping over a rake, rummaging through the compost bin, and at one point, picking a tomato off Grandpa's vine and eating it on the spot. Her lawyer, a stiff guy who looked like he hadn't smiled since the Clinton administration, kept objecting. But the judge, a woman with a sharp haircut and zero tolerance for nonsense, let most of the footage stand. At one point, she asked Linda, "Did you have permission to enter their property?" Linda stammered something about neighborhood integrity monitoring. The judge blinked, narrowed her eyes, and said flatly, "That's not a thing." Now, the fence, that was trickier. It wasn't technically illegal, but it sat in the gray zone of suburban law, especially once electricity gets involved. Alex argued it was non-lethal and a reasonable response to repeated intrusions. Linda's lawyer called it a reckless, intentional booby trap. Grandpa tried to chime in at one point, calling Linda the nosy antichrist of hedges, but Alex quickly advised him to stop talking. The judge called for a recess. We sat there, tense, in total silence. The courtroom smelled like copier toner and nerves. When she returned, she slid her glasses back up her nose, looked directly at Linda, and said, "You did trespass." Repeatedly. Then she turned to Grandpa. "Mr. Walker, your fence is imaginative." She paused. "You are hereby ordered to deactivate it," issued a formal warning, and fined $500 for reckless modification of residential equipment. Linda's mouth dropped open. Grandpa just gave a slow nod. Technically, it was a draw. But to all of us, it felt like a win. The fallout was instant. Linda got suspended from her position on the HOA board while they launched an internal review. Within days, a few other committee members mysteriously stepped down, no explanation given. A neighborhood meeting got scheduled to reevaluate HOA oversight procedures, which Grandpa referred to as Judgment Lawn. The whole block was buzzing. Gossip was everywhere. You could feel it in the air, like rebellion. People started putting out lawn flamingos. One house even added a pink dragon to their roof like it was Game of Thrones, Suburban Edition. Mr. Kim finally pulled out his outlaw bonsai tree and placed it proudly on his porch. He named it Linda. But the peace didn't last long. 2 nights after the court ruling, Grandpa heard a sound outside. When he went to check it out, he found the fence wires had been cut again, but this time, whoever did it meant business. The lines weren't just snipped. They'd been yanked, buried, and hidden under mulch. It was professional sabotage. He just stared at the mess. Said nothing. Looked up at the sky for a moment, then down at the footprints leading away from the back gate. And then, instead of fixing the fence, he walked into the garage, shut the door behind him, and started sketching. I peeked over his shoulder. It looked like some kind of blueprint for a motion-activated sprinkler system, with glitter built in. I asked what it was. He didn't look up. Just said, "Insurance." The next morning, we found a note in the mailbox. It wasn't handwritten. It was typed, clean, cold, and deeply unsettling. It said, "You've been warned. Dismantle all unauthorized modifications. HOA surveillance program. Phase 2 has begun." Grandpa read it, grinned. "Let's see what Phase 3 looks like when it gets wet," he said. Then he stapled the note to the garage wall right next to his blueprints and wrote in big Sharpa letters above it, "Battle plans." That day, Cedarbush Lane went quiet. Too quiet. But the flamingos stayed put. The army of gnomes kept growing. And the war, as Grandpa liked to say, was just getting interesting. It started with the birdhouses. At first, they looked completely normal, sweet little things on poles or hanging from porches. painted in pastels. Some had sunflowers or smiley faces. But after a storm knocked one down in Mrs. Wilkins' yard, Grandpa offered to help her hang it back up. When he picked it up, something rattled inside. He opened it up and found a tiny black device behind the panel. No bigger than his thumb. A microphone. He stared at it like it had just insulted his entire bloodline, then stormed home carrying that birdhouse like it was Exhibit A in a federal investigation. He slapped it down on the kitchen table. Mom screamed. Dad sighed, rubbed his temples, and quietly questioned all of his life choices. But Grandpa? He looked like he'd just cracked the case he'd been chasing for months. Alex came over to check it out, along with a tech-savvy buddy from law school who used to work in cybersecurity. They pulled the device apart, analyzed it, and eventually traced the signal. It was uploading audio to a cloud server. Registered under the name HOA Intelligence Monitoring Incorporated. That wasn't just a name. It was a plan. Somebody had been recording people's conversations right off their porches. Pastor Daniels almost passed out when he discovered a mic hidden underneath the base of his hummingbird feeder. And when Linda got confronted by an absolutely fuming Mrs. Wilkins, she shrugged and said, "It's part of our community safety enhancement initiative." Then she locked herself in her house for 2 full days and had groceries delivered through an app so she wouldn't have to look anyone in the eye. That's when Grandpa decided enough was enough. He didn't ask the HOA for permission. He didn't post flyers. No sign-up sheet. He just walked to the center of the cul-de-sac one sunny afternoon, popped open 3 folding chairs, set out a cooler full of lemonade, and stood next to a whiteboard that said, HOA equals Hidden Operations Agency. Written in permanent marker. By 6 o'clock sharp, the cul-de-sac was packed. More than 24 neighbors had shown up. Some brought folding chairs. One lady even came with a giant tub of popcorn. Pastor Doug wheeled in a portable pulpit like he was ready to bless the whole event. And there was Grandpa, standing front and center, our DIY camera crew at the ready. It was me and my buddy Luca, each of us holding a phone, and we had a drone buzzing overhead to catch the aerial drama. "Welcome to the first official tribunal of Cedarbush Lane," I announced. That's when Alex Martin stepped forward and started rolling out the receipts. First came the security footage, clip after clip of Linda trespassing in yards she didn't belong in. Then the audio from those creepy little microphones hidden in the birdhouses. Finally, he pulled up screenshots of leaked emails. Real ones. Ones that showed HOA committee members discussing ways to subtly correct the behavior of residents who weren't in line. That phrase, behavioral corrections, sent an actual chill through the crowd. One neighbor raised his hand and said he'd been told to stop wearing tank tops in his own garage. Another woman said she got a citation for having a laughing Buddha statue that was considered spiritually inconsistent with the neighborhood's vibe. And then there was the parrot. Mr. Garcia's bird, Pepe, had apparently been picking up on things that weren't exactly normal. During the meeting, Pepe sat calmly in his little cage and blurted out, "Don't talk on the porch. They're listening." Then, in a dead-on impression of Linda, he squawked, "Violation. Violation." Someone actually snorted lemonade through their nose. Mr. Garcia swore the parrot was just repeating stuff it had overheard, things people said when no one else was supposed to be around. And just like that, the entire crowd turned to look at the birdhouses like they were rigged with explosives. Linda didn't show, but Daryl did. He was the new interim HOA patrol guy. Pale dude, nervous energy, always holding a clipboard like it was glued to his hand. His mustache didn't help, made him look like a cartoon henchman on minimum wage. When folks pressed him about the surveillance, he mumbled something about it being just a pilot program. And when they asked who signed off on it, he suddenly got a phone call and bailed halfway through Alex's second slideshow. It was chaos. The whole carefully polished grip the HOA had over the neighborhood, coming apart at the seams. People were outraged, but they were also laughing. It had all gotten so ridiculous. The birdhouses, the parrot, even the wild theory about microphones and mailboxes. But the laughter came from folks finally waking up. That night, Grandpa sat on the porch, sipping iced tea like he was General Patton after a long campaign. "You know," he said, watching the sunset, "when I rigged that fence, I didn't think I was starting a revolution. I just wanted to keep nosy weirdos out of my tomato patch. I asked what he thought would happen now. He just gave me a shrug. Depends on how far people go when their little kingdom starts to fall apart. Turns out, we didn't have to wait long to find out. At the very next HOA meeting, packed, by the way, with over 50 angry residents, someone stood up that nobody expected. A tall, quiet man in a tweed vest. He lived down at the end of the street. Been there for years, but never once came to a meeting. His name was Leonard Brinkley. He calmly walked up to the front of the room, opened a manila folder, and said real steady, "As HOA president, I hereby dissolve this governing body. Effective immediately." Gasps went up from every corner. Linda, who finally decided to show up, looked like a cross between a Victorian schoolmistress and a balloon that had lost half its air. She leapt to her feet, practically screeched, "You can't do that." Leonard didn't even flinch. "Actually, I can," he said. "I started this HOA 12 years ago. Back then, it was about shared responsibility. About keeping the street looking nice, not spying on people, not running personal vendettas, and definitely not sticking microphones in birdhouses." You could have heard a pin drop. Then he added almost casually, "Oh, and Linda, this is long overdue. You killed my gardenias back in 2012 when you rewrote the watering schedule out of spite." I never forgot that moment. A few people snorted. Somebody started clapping. Linda looked like she might actually burst into flames right there in her chair. But before she could launch into another dramatic protest, Leonard raised his hand and said, calm as ever, "The paperwork signed. This meeting's over. Effective today," he added, "Cedarbush Lane is officially a free neighborhood." And just like that, people cheered. Real, honest-to-goodness cheering. Folks hugged. Somebody even popped a confetti cannon left over from a baby shower. Grandpa just stood there, blinking like he couldn't process it. "Huh," he said. "That's not exactly how I pictured the war ending." Then he leaned in close and whispered, "Still, maybe let's keep the glitter sprinkler trap active. Just in case." Over the next few weeks, everything on Cedarbush Lane started to shift. Not all at once, but little by little, things changed. Flamingos began popping up in yards, bright pink and unapologetic. The Reynolds family put a 12-foot inflatable duck on their lawn. Just because they could. Mr. Kim started teaching bonsai trimming classes on his front porch. People painted their fences wild colors. The mailboxes? Still leaning and no one cared. And Pepe the parrot? He became a local celebrity. Folks came by just to hear him squawk, "Violation," and whisper, "They're listening." As for Grandpa, he rewired the fence. But instead of electric shocks, it played classic rock tracks when triggered. The most popular one? Sweet Home Alabama. Every time the neighbor's dog brushed up against the gate, Lynyrd Skynyrd came blaring out like it was a freedom anthem. One afternoon, I asked Grandpa if he was happy. He looked at me, thoughtful for a second, and said, "I'm not happy. I'm satisfied." Then he winked, and went right back to welding something in the garage that absolutely looked like it should be illegal. That night, I stepped out onto the porch and just stared up at the stars. For the first time in a long time, things felt peaceful. Like we had finally made it through the madness. But just as I turned to head inside, I heard it, this faint buzzing. High up in the sky, above the roofline, a tiny red light blinked in the dark. A drone. Hovering. Watching. I stared at it, and I swear for a second it stared back. Then it zipped off into the night, silent, fast, gone. Inside, Grandpa was already hunched over his workbench, sketching something new. I asked what it was. He didn't even look up. Just grinned and said, "Anti-air." And that's when I realized Cedarbush Lane was never going back to normal. But honestly, we were all better off for it.